Welcome back. I'm your host, Rowan Cook. I make coffee on the internet.
And I'm Ben Bicknell. I judge people who make coffee, but only at competitions.
And together we are It's Just Coffee, the podcast for people who know it's never just coffee.
That's right. And I've got a hard truth for you, Rowan.
Oh, hit me.
Very few people actually understand the ethics behind buying green coffee. You know, it's a difficult topic. And I do a lot of work with buyers and sellers through my agency Open Floor. And there's a lot of conversation around it, you know, ethical, sustainable buying. But there's also often a lot of confusion.
Oh, dude, you're telling me. I mean, I've mainly worked as a barista, but also educator, doing a lot of online stuff. But I know a lot of the words, you know, that are being thrown around: fair trade, ethical, direct trade, but actually breaking down what they really mean, I'm not sure if I'm that clear. And at the moment, even with Golden Brown, we're talking right now about, you know, kind of expanding the coffee menu and making sure that it's done right is something that, you know, is really important to us.
Yeah, I think it's a really common thing. And it's not unusual, and it's understandable as well that there's this difficulty in wrangling all of these terms. So we really wanted to use today's episode to dig into that and find some more knowledge about it that we can share. So we have an incredible guest joining us today. Colleen Anunu is the Senior Advisor for Fairtrade International, also has an amazing history and roster in specialty coffee behind them, notably working for Gimme Coffee in New York, an iconic specialty brand there. Yeah, just, you know, director of coffee, managing director there, you know, all of the big titles. Also happened to be a past president of SCA, you know, no biggie there, but an amazing wealth of knowledge to tap into. Colleen, welcome to the podcast.
Hey.
Hi, thank you.
I mean, we'll start off with a great question that we ask a lot of our guests. What's your go-to coffee every day?
Oh, I have a cappuccino pretty much every single day. I'm really lucky because when I departed Gimme, I said, you know what? I'd really love to have free coffee for life in the form of a cappuccino. And they said, deal. So,
great deal.
So that's good. But of course, tip every time.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And also very different. I mean, when I was in the States, the cappuccino is kind of like a great specialty coffee drink to get there. It's like more coffee flavor, more that. In Australia, or is it different? I don't know. In Australia, it's like chocolate on top.
I mean, I really have no idea the difference, right? So if I'm ordering a cappuccino in Australia, what am I getting? And what are you getting here if you order a cappuccino, right? We're still talking about like 6 ounces total.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much a third, and a third. So what do you call that there?
I don't know. Like here, I would say the cappuccino size probably varies cafe to cafe. I'd say sometimes you'd get it at 6, but I'd say sometimes it goes up to like 8 ounce. And then it's got like the chocolate, but also sugar powder on the top as well. So it's kind of this weird middle ground between the two. Yeah. I definitely think here the cappuccino is less, it's more of an introduction into the kind of specialty thing. Like maybe you'd get it transitioning between a mocha or a mocha to a flat white. Yep. But in the States, I feel like a cappuccino is definitely like more considered, you know, one of the specialty drinks you'd order from milk-based.
Yeah. I mean, it is similar. I think maybe we have like a little bit less foam ratio in there. In Australia, it tends to be kind of like same as like a latte, similar kind of like, you know, whatever that is, a third of an inch. And yeah, we definitely have, the default is probably still chocolate dusted on top, like chocolate powder dusted on top of the cappuccino, which can be very delicious.
Oh, absolutely. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. But it's a little different.
Now into some, now that we've discussed what a cappuccino is,
out of the way.
Now that that's out of the way.
Is the podcast over now?
Yeah, that's it. The cappuccino pod.
See you. Thank you.
See you. Goodbye. Now, we talked about it before. You didn't always work in this position beforehand. You were working in coffee. You were working at Gimme Coffee. And you were always saying that even working that position, that trying to do the right thing in coffee was really important to you. But you know, sometimes working in retail, maybe that's not the position where you can have the biggest impact. When was it that your perspective changed on doing the right thing and what it actually means in coffee? And what are some of the misconceptions you had early on?
I feel like a lot of people think they're doing the right thing. So I guess it's like, well, you know, what did I feel really pulled? When did I feel this like pull? Like this, whatever I'm doing is not right. It's not the thing. I need to be focused somewhere else. Probably happened to I must have been like around 2010 or 2011. So there was, SCA had this event, or SCAA at the time, when they had their expo, their annual expo, they used to have this event like the 2 days preceding it called the Symposium. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Went to a whole bunch of those.
And then it was Rico, and now it's nothing. But yeah, so it would be like 2 days. Kind of the first day would be focused on supply chain issues, and the second day would be like focused on innovations in coffee technology and stuff like that. Is generally how I saw it. But there was a presentation and a short video. It was about a 15 to 20 minute video by this guy. Well, he didn't make the video, but he was like the narrator, and he sort of took the videographers through this documentary. It's called The Thin Months, or called After the Harvest, and it was about the thin months, which are the months immediately following coffee harvest in a few cooperatives in Central America, just really documenting their food insecurity issues, right? And these are pretty prominent cooperatives in the specialty coffee scene around that time, right? So this is like the time where, third wave specialty coffee had really like established its foothold, and counterculture was a big deal, and Stumptown was a big deal, and intelligentsia was a big deal, and they were all buying from these cooperatives, right? And we were fed all of this narrative around specialty coffee premiums and quality as a pathway to sustainability, and maybe quality as the only viable pathway to sustainability, since there are real upgrading strategies, this sort of like neo-colonial model of like individualism and uniqueness and value. But there were still people who were starving. So his name was Rick Pizer, the man who made that video with the videographers. And he was, I believe, I don't know his exact title, but he was sort of running the sustainability at Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, which was big at the time, but they weren't yet the Keurig that we know of them today. And just thinking like, wow, what a bold move for this man to really put this spotlight on some of the real critical issues that are happening in coffee. And I just remember walking out of that room before like the whole event was even over, and just realizing, oh, my life is changing right now. I cannot just be focused on quality as a driver for sustainability. That seems kind of bullshit. Sorry, can I swear on the podcast?
Hell yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so, I mean, at the time I was still working. I was working with Gimme. I had been there, I don't know, probably 7 years at the time, and I was buying their coffee and sort of running their roasting department and working with a lot of importers that were just starting out these sort of like relationship coffee type of models. So there was direct trade, which was really being pioneered by Stumptown and Intelli and counterculture. You could see it all over the coffee forums and all the fun little message boards that we used to have back in the day. And yeah, for like other sort of like the second movement of the third wave that were happening in other cities, we started to work closer with importers on these relationship coffee models or direct trade models. And the Caravella coffee at the time was called Virmax, and they pioneered this program called Las Mingas, and it was really about connecting roasters with producers, but always through Virmax or always through Caravella. And just thinking that these pathways are important, and relationships are important, and trust is important, but there's something else going on that is still part of this capitalist model that of extraction and like wealth extraction and undervaluation of kind of like what's important in supporting smallholder producers in areas that are really under-resourced, and you cannot just do it alone by paying high-quality premiums for micro-lots. Like it's a volume-based business, and that kind of volume just doesn't work. It's important, and I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but yeah, that's kind of like where I was at the time when I started to realize that something is not right here. We're being fed a lot of bullshit in the industry to get us to pay for classes, go to competitions, get involved, have the arena effect of going to an SCA expo, all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, it's not for me. So started to change.
No, that was fantastic. And you just brought up then as well smallholder farms. And I think as, a lot of baristas will be working in the industry and they kind of romanticize this idea of smallholder farms and all that. Can you just give us a quick rundown of what smallholder farm actually means? And, we're talking about farm size, labor structures, household economics. Can you just kind of break it down for us?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just start by saying that the majority of coffee being produced in the world is by smallholders. And some organizations, whether it's like an NGO or, I don't know, for-profit business, will often describe smallholders in terms of a farm size. Fairtrade, we describe them a little bit differently. There's definitely a farm size in the standard that's related to what is a smallholder farmer, but it's really this conception that the smallholder producers are farmers that are not structurally sort of dependent on a permanent workforce, and that while they might have hired labor, particularly in really demanding labor situations like during a harvest, the majority of the production and the majority of the year, they're actively maintaining their production area with family workforce or family labor. So that's one of the differences between smallholders and maybe what would be considered an estate, which might have a lot of permanent or even a few permanent staff throughout the year, but then hire a lot of migrant labor or seasonal labor during like high peak harvest times.
So they're the owner-operator of the farm world. We've got the cafe owner-operators. This is the equivalent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So it's not necessarily always having to do with, less than 5 hectares or less than 10 hectares, but the majority of the coffee being produced in the world are by disaggregated smallholder farmers. So I would say, I don't know, some statistics will say 75%, some will say closer to 67, but wherever you're looking, there's always a different metric or calculation. And I think what's really important for folks to realize is that unlike other industries like cocoa, where there is a lot of market consolidation and like small number of producing countries, that the cocoa industry is super consolidated. In coffee, it's very, very disaggregated, and there's no there's not a lot of vertical integration within value chains or in supply chains. So it makes things very inefficient from the get-go. And it also means that the farmers don't have a lot of power. So what Fairtrade does is work with smallholder producer cooperatives exclusively for coffee. For other products, they also work with estates. They also work with like importers and exporters that sort of organize in clusters. But for smallholders in coffee, it's 100% smallholder producer organizations, or what we like to refer to as cooperatives, because of that power dynamic and because of how disadvantaged disaggregated smallholders are.
Yeah, and I know when I've traveled a fair bit for buying of coffee and visiting different regions, that smallholder farmer kind of model and the realities of it can look quite different, whereas if you're in like East Africa, in Burundi, it's very small farms. A lot of it is essentially coffee is like the cash crop to a subsistence kind of crop and way of kind of living as well. And so, whereas in different regions around the world, it's a more of a core business kind of focus. It can be a little bit larger scale, but I think that's kind of the interesting thing when buyers from afar start talking about, I'm buying coffee and I want it to be like this. Like you talked about quality, like buying for quality and changes to quality. But you think about just your own life. If you're doing something that's kind of a side hustle that you don't have the time and energy to dedicate to, and someone comes in and says, I want you to do all of these different things. It's like, well, I've got to kind of get the food on the table and pay the rent, that's like a key. I think it's like the consideration of what this dynamic means for the asks and the implication for the supply chain, right?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought up the food on the table because, if you think about smallholder and family farm economics, it's not just the activities like the establishment of the crop or, working in the nursery or planting seeds or the maintenance of the crop and the weeds and the harvesting and, pruning. It's also the family labor, right? So who is cooking meals for the family and who is doing domestic labor? And, that's not always incorporated in cost of production models. And, I think a lot of people that look at smallholder producers with this, what we call the gender lens, which is to sort of look at of a household, what things are remunerated and what things are not remunerated, which means what things earn you an income and what things don't earn you an income, but are they also equally valuable in order to keep the family farm running, right? And so that's another aspect to some of those household economics that you had asked about originally.
Yeah. And look, we're kind of on the same topic of like the pricing and who carries different parts in the supply chain. And I think something with pricing conversations that often doesn't come up is the idea about risk and who carries that. We're not just talking about pricing risk, but there's climate change, market volatility, all kinds of shifts there. But from your perspective, Colleen, who carries the risk in the coffee supply chain or the largest amounts of risk and are they more exposed?
I guess, it really depends on the type of risk like you were just explaining and, what you're trying to interrogate and just to think like, okay, well, is the biggest risk like who's actually going to lose their shirts and their total their livelihoods if there's a landslide? Absolutely. So it's clear to me, and it would be silly for me to say like, oh, importers and traders, they don't have any risk. They carry tons of risk, right? Financial institutions that are funding them carrying a lot of risk. And, if you look at just like the last year and a half of what's been happening in the market, there are a number of bankruptcies for traders and a number of consolidations in the trading world that have been going on over like the last, 5 or so years. But particularly in this last 18 months, it's like they can't make their margin calls, right? So the banks are like, okay, you're too exposed, like pay us back a certain amount of money for these margin calls. And those importers are then taking the money that they were supposed to pay to producers and paying the banks, right? And so they're getting behind on their payments to producers, which like they're defaulting on paying contracts. This isn't everybody, but it is happening in the industry. And so when you think about it that way, it's like, yeah, they're carrying risk, but the producer organizations, and I say that a lot because that's the type of, business that I work with, they're carrying a shitload of risk, right? Especially when payment terms like unfair trading practices and long payment terms mean that containers have gone on a ship and they're already in Europe, right? Or Australia or the US, and the importer's like, oh, sorry, I can't pay you. Like, you're never going to get that money, right? You might try and establish a payment plan over X amount of years, but, essentially it's like, you cannot pay your producers. You cannot pay back a pre-harvest finance loan from a social lender. So there's a lot of risk that actually will end up further bankrupting down the chain. And so, I guess when I think about risk in the value chain, I definitely see that, if you like plot out the value chain generally on an x-axis and sort of risk on a y-axis, it does feel like, I worked in coffee retail during COVID. I know that baristas and retail workers carry a lot of risk. And I know that coffee producers also carry a lot of risk. So it feels like there's this U shape. But yeah, it is like totally apparent to me that smallholder producers, farm workers carry the most risk of anybody within the whole value chain.
Yeah. And I think, would you say that it's a good framework of thinking about it, that it's not just do people carry risk, because anyone working and in business, there's a level of risk, but it's the safety nets that are behind that, or the the kind of the ability to bounce back or the mechanisms to kind of catch yourself, where I imagine that the framework here is that like producers, especially disaggregated smallholder producers where it all flows through to, have very little safety net there if the risk goes against them.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, with climate change, absolutely. I mean, whole production environments are being wiped out. If you look at like back 15 years ago, all across Central America, Roya had decimated crops overnight. There's landslides that had just happened in the late fall in Sumatra and Aceh, which is, a prominent region for specialty coffee coming from Sumatra. Human rights risks, the economic risk of not having access to credit, and incomes, low productivity incomes that don't meet sort of that dignified livelihood mandate. There's so much going on there.
And I guess this all comes back to the umbrella of like why we're talking about this, of like, well, if we want a great coffee future collectively and we want to keep, serving out delicious coffees, then we've got to address these kinds of supply chain issues. Otherwise, there won't be any of that. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Marco Beverage Systems.
I tell you what, baristas get slammed behind the bar day in, day out. I think they're the unsung heroes of the industry.
And Marco is quietly trying to remove some of their daily slog.
The Milk Pal is built for busy bars. You simply press a button, you got hot milk, hot foam, cold foam, textured to perfection.
It's definitely a lot of options. They can do dairy and oat milk as well, whatever you're working with. You just press the button, select the exact texture and the volume.
And then, because you can select the volume, you're not tipping out milk down the sink, wasting money, and baristas aren't glued to the steam wand all day.
If it sounds like the Milk Pal could help you, go visit marcobeveragesystems.com and learn a little bit more. Colleen, there's a couple of phrases that come up, I think, in these conversations that are like buzz phrases that sometimes people might not know about. And, Rowan, you mentioned like you hear all of these terms, but what do they actually mean? And so like living income is one that's started to come up in the conversation, as well as like minimum price. But I mean, living income often just kind of gets bundled into like we paid more or we hit a minimum. But can you unpack for us the difference between minimum price, cost of production, and living income?
Yes. We can start with minimum price. Definitionally, it's the least quantity possible. So it's like the minimum. It is the floor. It is a safety net. And whatever you set as your minimum price, hopefully you have accountability that you don't go below that. In fair trade, a minimum price is defined more as a safety net, right? So it's not necessarily going to meet the cost of production in every single production environment. And I can talk through just how those prices are determined and the kind of stakeholder consultations and, the real like how the vegan sausage is made for how these prices are set, because it's not like people in a boardroom saying like that, that's what the price is going to be. It's like, we're actually consulting with thousands of producers who are like, you can't raise it too much or else I'm going to lose all my market, but I can't have it too low because then we can't survive. So, in the fair trade terms, it's really that safety net for when the market pretty much crashes. And that's basically the concept of a minimum price in terms of fair trade. So it is related to cost of production. The current minimum price for fair trade, really if you think about like almost 75% of all the coffee that is fair trade coffee that's traded in the world is washed Arabica. And, of that, a high percentage is organic and a smaller percentage is conventional. But a washed Arabica conventional right now, the safety net is $1.80 per pound. And I didn't see where the market closed today, but it was definitely $3 something earlier today. So obviously the minimum price is not coming into effect. Only if the market dipped below 180 would that minimum price be enacted. So right now it's like, it's the minimum price or the market price, whichever is higher. And so, I think it closed probably somewhere around $3. And then on top of that, within the standard are these additional premiums. So it's a mandated 20-cent premium that goes to the producer organization. And then if you are producing organic coffee and you're selling it on organic terms, certified organic, then you get a 40-cent differential. So anyone that bought coffee today on the market that was a fair trade conventional coffee was paying the market price plus 20 cents. And then if it was a fair trade organic coffee was the market price plus 60 cents. And then obviously you add your quality or country differentials on top of that as well. So that's how that minimum price works in play. Cost of production though is a little bit different. So it refers to all of the different costs within a farming production context. So we're talking like fixed costs of actual physical assets, cars, tools, facilities, things like that you're using just like you would in a business. Variable costs of labor associated with all of the different farming activities sort of throughout the year, whether it's starting in the establishment of like nurseries and doing all of the work and creating that seed stock and creating the shoots and transplanting them and then everything from weeding and pruning and all that stuff, right? So all of those activities that are on the farm, if they're done by your household, you're not paying anyone to do them, but you still have to conceptualize them as that is valuable activity. And if you associated it with an hourly rate or whatever maybe a local minimum rate would be in that region, if there is one, then you start to understand what your total cost of the producing actually ends up being, right? So it's fixed costs, it's variable cost, and sometimes it's opportunity costs of I'm doing this, I'm not doing something else, right? I'm utilizing my tools for this, I'm not utilizing my tools for something else. So some cost of production analysis also incorporate those opportunity costs of owning a farm, right? But where the rubber really meets the road is when you take that sort of like all of the costs throughout the year, but then you look at, well, what's my total productivity? And the productivity is really what that level, which is like variable, right? And there's some sort of correlation between the amount of inputs and fertilizer and the productivity, but it's not always one-to-one. It's a high correlation, but it's not all the time. Whereas like there's a smaller correlation with the amount of labor that you're putting into a farm and the productivity. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So yeah. So it's not like, oh, I'm working extra hard, I'm going to get more. I'm going to get more and more and more. That's just not how it works. So yeah, if you have low productivity, you're going to have higher cost of production. If you have high productivity, you have lower cost of production. So the minimum price for fair trade is set by taking multiple cost of production analysis throughout the world, and then doing farmer interviews to get, and surveys to get that cost of production data, and then working with panels, regional panels to say, does this seem directionally accurate? Can you verify? It's a whole validation process. And then we go through a consultation, which we're going through a consultation right now for an updated minimum price. And that basically says, farmers, you look at this average cost of production, basically from Vietnam to Brazil to Honduras to Kenya, and we separate it from Robusta and Arabica, but we say, as an average price of $2.25 FOB, do you support this change? And market partners, big roasters, small roasters, traders, do you support the change to $2.25, which is an average cost of production price based on our studies? So that's how cost of production plays into minimum price. And I'm sure that there's plenty of other models out there that also do. We want to set a minimum price based on cost of production. I know that many roasters are doing this now. It's just that cost of production studies are very intensive. They're very expensive, as are living income studies. So I can jump into living income if that works. I'll chat about anything.
Definitely.
Okay. So living income, there's an organization, a global organization called the Global Living Wage Coalition. And they're sort of the go-to, there's a living income community of practice across many different sectors. Coffee is one of the sectors. And it really looks at, how does living income, how does it work in theory? How does it work in practice? And what can we do to better align all industry actors, whether they're focused on quality, whether they're focused on organic, whether they're focused on regenerative, blah, 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 commercial, specialty, whatever. And so the Global Living Wage Coalition and the Living Income Community of Practice, they sort of set this definition that a living income is the net annual income. I'm going to read this now. Is the net annual income required for a household in a particular place to afford a decent standard of living for all members of that household. So living income as a concept is a farmer concept, right? It's not a business concept. It's a farmer concept, right? And living income studies that are done take a lot of publicly available data into account to basically say, if I am an average household, and maybe that average is a married couple with 2 children, assuming that they work between them 1.5 jobs, this is the total income that that household would need in order to meet a decent standard of living. Includes school fees, includes a nutritious diet, includes all these different things that not everybody has access to, right? But if they did, based on publicly available data, what would that need to be? Is it $3,000 per year equivalent? In many cases, it is. So the living income calculations are done using a specific methodology that take all of these data sources into account. It's called the anchor methodology. It was developed by economists and field practitioners within the FAO, I believe, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. So a living income is that. It's a theoretical but really based in reality calculation. A living income reference price. Now we're getting a little bit
getting
deeper.
Deep dive. School us.
We're going deep. So a living income reference price is a model that was developed by Fairtrade International and the Sustainable Livelihoods team, which is like a programmatic and policy team that works within Fairtrade. And it is defined as a price that a typical farmer household with a viable farm size, so it's kind of like a theoretical, this is a viable farm size, and this is a viable, sustainable production level or productivity level. You take the cost of production data, or you take the living income data, and then you set up these theoretical models, and you say, if you have this sort of size of farm and this sort of productivity, you should be able to earn a specific price based on that productivity and size and living income data. Here's a price, right? Here's a price that is a reference price for people to pay. So it's both theoretical, but it's also practical, right? And so you take that living income benchmark, you look at a productivity benchmark, you look at that cost of production data and all of the investment required to attain a target yield. And then you look at what is a viable crop area. Half a hectare, which is a case in many production contexts, particularly in East Africa, where the farm gets transferred down to your family members and your offspring, and you split it and you split it and you split it. Half a hectare is not a viable farm size. And so we're not necessarily talking about this is going to be a sustainable model for everybody, but it is this theoretical concept, but it's also practical applications because roasters are using these reference prices to set their minimum prices within their own contracts, right? So they might be buying coffee from a fair trade producer organization that has a minimum price associated with it according to our standards, but they're saying, you know what, I'm gonna go one more. And I'm gonna use your living income reference price. I'm gonna bake that into my contract and say, I will not pay you less than this reference price. If the market is higher, so be it, but I will never pay less than this reference price.
That's cool. So it does bring it all down to all of this information down to an actual advice on per kilo or per pound pricing.
Yeah, it's usually it'll get down to kind of the local context, right? So it'll be a kilo of parchment, and then you'll have to do all of the, transitioning into a green bean equivalent and a USD and sort of take all of that, take all the exchange rates into account and stuff like that.
So I don't feel like that's very well known at all in the industry. Like that's news to me that there's this price reference.
Yeah, there's, and the thing is that just like the cost of production studies are pretty intensive, they can be expensive. Living income reference price studies are also very expensive. And we're talking like a couple tens of thousands of dollars. So there's 13 reference prices in coffee right now through, Fairtrade International. But yeah, there's definitely like this, what we call like an offer to business where we know that roasters are going to Fairtrade and saying like, I want to know, it doesn't need to be for my specific value chain partner, but sometimes it is. But it's like, I want to know what a living income reference price would be in Brazil. And like, we don't have one for Brazil right now. Doesn't mean we don't want one. The other thing to say about it is it's totally understandable that roasters want to arrive at some magic number and pay that number and call it a day, right? It's like, we all want to do our best. But a living income reference price is not about a static number and a price paid, right? It's associated with a resilience strategy for farmers that, it would be like the dynamic strategy of like adaptive or regenerative farming practices with the hopes that, you're putting in better inputs for a higher yield that could eventually diminish that reference price. So you're not trying to say like a living income price always goes up because it's associated with the types of inputs that you're putting in and the quantity of the productivity coming out. We want those things to all match up. We need price, we need cost efficiencies, we need yields, we need all of that. So it's really like an inclusive strategy and not just a number.
How you doing, Rowan? We've gone deep dive.
I know.
We've gone coffee trade deep dive.
Yeah.
Is it kind of clicking into place with some of the aspects that you've known about coffee?
Oh, everything that I've kind of known is like the earlier stages of, the top level stuff, but diving deeper into, all of this analysis and the cost of living and all those sides of it is far deeper than anything I've kind of dived into.
Yeah.
And kind of interesting the fact that, you could be as a roaster looking at a price and you can actually look up the cost of living price in that area and be like, no, I should be paying you more money.
Yeah.
And making those things accessible and making it more kind of standardized would be amazing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time, I don't know if this is the case. There are some people who maybe are a little dodgier and want to get a deal and don't care. But I think in a lot of cases with roasters, they want to do the right thing. It's just about like giving them the tools to be able to do the right thing.
Yeah, trying to figure out how to tackle it. And I guess I've got a question for you, Colleen. This is on the kind of cost of production. There's a lot of conversation coming in about individual roasters or buyers kind of wanting to find out this information, right? Cost of production. What does it cost to actually produce? And using that as an anchor, for hopefully better purchasing. My question is, should roasters be opening up their books for coffee producers to look at their cost of production numbers?
I don't know.
It's an interesting thing, right? With like this idea of like transparency, but is it only kind of one-sided? Is it just a roaster with like power dynamics and stuff saying like, show me your books and tell me how much profit you're making?
I see your question now. Yeah. I was like, I'm not going to tell anyone how to run their business. But yes, when you're talking about like information asymmetry, it's like you're not going to be interrogating the partners that you're working with and then not sort of offer some sort of reciprocity, right? And that doesn't make any sense to me. But what is the value of that, right? Is it just like, how actionable would it be to show like, well, this is the cost to produce in my roastery, right? Like, this is how much I'm paying in my mortgage every month. Like, it's useful information and probably could be actionable. That wasn't the model that I ever engaged with because we didn't go like that deep.
Yeah.
But maybe some people want to. I don't know if that there's actual ROI in that in terms of like better ethical sourcing or impact at a farm level.
Yeah. Look, I think it could get very messy very quickly. And it's kind of a complex thing. But I think it's almost like an interesting question just to pose to yourself as a roaster. If you're going out and kind of demanding full business transparency from your supply partners, it's like, well, just do a little bit of check on yourself. It's like, would you be willing to, how would you receive that request in your business?
Yeah, it is like kind of opening yourself up to everything. And obviously like it's mainly here, it's here to be beneficial and to help these farmers. But there's also a part where it's like, we want to make a higher profit too. It's like, I know exactly what you need to live. And so that's what you'll get paid. And it's like, no, let's go a bit more than that. If we can, that'd be great.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, okay, so talking about me understanding and having all that, if we're rewinding a bit, so we're talking about fair trade as well here. You're part of fair trade. And to a lot of people, to a lot of consumers, I would say that fair trade is just kind of a logo on a bag. It's kind of a shortcut to try to feel like, okay, I can get behind this product and it feels good. I feel like there was a part maybe in the specialty world where some people moved away from that and kind of direct trade became the sexy thing to say and like, oh, it's got to be direct trade. That's the only ethical way. Direct trade is what's right.
Yeah. Jack Simpson just won the World Barista Championships, technically making him the best barista in the world.
But I have a question for you. He used Riverina Fresh milk. He flew it from Melbourne to Milan. Does that make Riverina Fresh the best milk in the world?
I'm not quite
You
sure.
heard it here first. Riverina Fresh is the best milk in the world.
Well, look, it certainly received some great scores from the judges. And thanks to the team at Riverina, who are kind sponsors of the podcast, they have arranged a sweet deal.
In Australia, you can get a free trial delivered to your cafe right now and serve up the same milk as the World Barista Champion. Just visit riverinafresh.com.au and sign up for your free trial. That's riverinafresh.com.au. But now, maybe there's some problems that are coming up with that too. Let's just go back. Can you break down for us exactly what Fairtrade is doing?
Yeah. How long do we have? Just kidding.
Give us a snapshot overview here.
So Fairtrade is what I consider to be a market intervention. And I think many people consider it to be a market intervention, right? So there's this common conception that fair trade is, in the words of the late, great Aaliyah, nothing but a number. And it just refers to, that price intervention within the marketplace, right? That safety net that I was talking about earlier. But in reality, that is just one aspect of what fair trade is, right? So fair trade, again, I'm not going to dig into the history, and there are many people that would love to tell you about the history of fair trade, but I want to tell you what we do now, and it's sort of looking at the product standard or like a third-party compliance mechanism to be focused on good production principles, right? So we're talking about principles of management, of how a cooperative is managed, the transparency within a cooperative system, having good techniques in board and governance and sharing information with members, that's all part of it. And then there's a focus on the social aspect, which is also how membership engages through committees, and that's all part of it. And then there's environmental standards and a focus on agroecology and climate resilient strategies. That's all part of it. And then there's economic, which is the minimum price and premium and organic differential, right? So that's all within the context of a production standard. And that's just one aspect, right? And I think that's what a lot of people focus on because it's it's the intervention, right? And so there's a lot of people in this capitalist system, especially in specialty coffee, that like to pretend they're not part of a capitalist system, but they are. And they say that, it's so hard to work with fair trade cooperatives, blah, blah, blah. I'm just yeah, because you can't necessarily push them around or get you enrolled in your program that gives you control, right? And so it's really about giving voice and value to smallholder producer cooperatives who essentially are the most voiceless and most valueless within this giant commodity system. And within that, there's also what we call the trade standard, which really focuses on these core principles of ethical trade. And I know a lot of direct traders and relationship coffee buyers also like to focus on responsible purchasing practices and ethical trade practices, but it's not checked and it's not baked into their system. There's no assurance, there's no accountability necessarily. They just say we do this, we work with them, we do that, we have multiple year contracts. Sure, great. I love that third party aspect of fair trade, which is that the checking of contract terms and the checking of payment terms and the checking of all of that. And I would say, like, aside from fair trade, if people are watching, I would, or listening, look up the Ethical Trade Initiative's responsible purchasing practices for food. There are 5 core principles that you can work into your coffee buying program and really focus on, why is it important to have specific types of payment terms? Why is it important to have long-term contracts? Why is it important to share that information within your contract so that there is some sort of accountability mechanism and not just like, sure, handshake, moving on. So a lot of those purchasing practices from the ETI are baked into our trade standard. So I just walked you through one aspect of fair trade, which is product standards, production and trade. Beyond that, there's a shitload of advocacy. Sorry, swear again. There's a lot of advocacy. There are specific policies that are guiding how we are trying to integrate, let's say, agroecology or agroforestry or human rights and due diligence into our standards. So it's sort of like we're setting policies that will then likely be incorporated into the standard itself. There are programs such as the Living Wage team, the Sustainable Livelihoods team that focuses on specific living income reference prices and working with businesses as like a Fair Trade Plus sort of model. There's a climate and environment team that really focuses on like a lot of the EUDR legislation that's coming out and, the programmatic support for producers and for businesses. And speaking of producer support, one of the amazing things about the fair trade system is the fact that it is 50% owned by the producer networks, of which there are 3. One in Latin America, one in Africa, and one in the Asia-Pacific region. So those producer networks advocate on behalf of producer organizations within their networks to say, these policies, these standards aren't producer-centric, right? Like, there's a difference between producer-focused sort of trade and producer-centric models of trade, where you really say, we're consulting, we're taking in feedback, and they can put a stop to things. And they did that with the cocoa price review in the last year. The producer network said, we don't like the proposal. Go back to the drawing board, right? And it took a long time to rewrite what that price was going to be. So, the producer support from these networks are so critical. They focus on building capacity and building resilient strategies on the farm level. They focus on expanding market access on the business level. They focus on integrating farm technology and supporting with like geolocation data and like data innovation and technology innovation. And they also support a lot of the social justice stuff and human rights and environmental due diligence that is really being mandated by the European Union.
So the short answer, more than the logo on a bag.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why it makes it so complicated when people are like, I've seen the yin yang guy.
Yeah.
In the US, they're like, I've seen the bucket guy. Like, sure, it means something, but it's so complicated, and it's hard to just say in an elevator. We just took the elevator to the top of.
But I think that's incredible. I mean, I didn't know so much of that stuff of like what's going on behind it, and so in summary, would you say that like, obviously fair trade as an organization revenues fees from the certification from both sides of the supply chain, right? So in terms of, if a roaster is selling coffee as fair trade certified, they'll be paying some kind of licensing fee, and there's some kind of fee on the producer side. But essentially for a consumer or a roaster who's buying that coffee, they can know that there's the safety net minimum price, but then there's all of this advocacy and standards work and outreach and strengthening of that whole supply system that's out, that's beyond it. That's essentially the funding where it's going, right?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. So there's a mandated percentage of the licensing fees from, let's say, Fairtrade Australia. I know Fairtrade New Zealand, Fairtrade America, Fairtrade Germany. The licensing fees goes to support that marketing organization to like help business partners sell more coffee, right? And so they like work with retailers, blah, blah, blah. And there's a percentage of that licensing fee that goes back into the system that supports Fairtrade International, which is what the organization I work for. And then a huge portion of that budget goes to support producer networks, right? And I think that that's like, people don't even know that there's producer networks, and they don't know how it's supported through licensing fees or like what it goes to. They always just see the number of minimum price or 20-cent premium or, whatever. And so it's hard to get beyond that because, there's so much, as you were saying earlier, that fair trade really fell by the wayside in the early 2000s when specialty coffee and direct trade coffee really came onto the scene. Because, it was fair trade is focused on aggregating smallholder producers in an ethical, like social justice way, which is totally admirable. But when you're like, look at all these flavor compounds, look what we could do with processing, like it doesn't dabble in that. And that is not to say that fair trade producers don't dabble in that. So when I went back to Gimme in 2020, I had worked for Gimme, I'd gone to graduate school, worked in the fair trade system, and gone back to Gimme to transition it into a worker-owned cooperative that's exclusively sourced high-quality fair trade coffee from producer cooperatives. And so there are tons of producer cooperatives that are doing processing experimentation, that are, selling like large containers, like multiple containers of 86 plus coffee. And they're selling them to these boutique importers. This is a crazy thing to me. Like they're like the boutique importers out there that are like, put my stamp on the bag and, sell you the micro lot. They're buying from cooperatives that are fair trade certified, and they're shitting all over fair trade certification because it's the way that they're differentiating themselves. Yeah. And I'm like, if these producers for the past 20 years did not have the safety net, there would be no business for you to buy microlots from.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, it's so crazy to me.
Man, that makes so much sense because I know back in Australia in the early 2000s, fair trade kind of certification here I think kind of got hit with a little backwards step because there was the specialty movement happening at the same time that was like all about quality and taste in the cup. And unfortunately, at that point, there was a lot of fair trade certified coffees coming into Australia that were really low quality. They had the stamp, but they actually tasted bad. So people are like, oh, I feel good about buying this. And then they go and brew it and say, now I feel bad.
No, but my tummy hurts.
Yeah. So, but look, fair trade might have like its criticisms for sure. Like there's things that aren't perfect in the system, but I think there's some uncomfortable conversations we need to have about the specialty movement as this broad umbrella as well. It's like, we kind of have good intentions. Like Rowan kind of said, that generally a lot of people say, oh yeah, I'm into specialty coffee. I buy specialty coffee. We think that's all good. But what are some of the top risks that you see where specialty coffee can maybe be perpetuating some of the problematic kind of trade aspects?
I think a lot of roasters are definitely engaging in a way that they have time for. I want to be generous and be like, who's got the time? I ran a business. I hated doing HR investigations when all I wanted to do was focus on coffee sourcing, right? And that's just the reality when you are running a roasting company. It's like if you want to be ethical and you want to support your workers, you're spending more time supporting your workers, and you have to outsource. And you also don't have the skill set to really run a cost of production analysis. Get on a plane and travel all over the world, and do you even need to nowadays? But there's so much that I feel like we're leaning on importers and traders to tell a story and essentially keep us in their portfolio, right? And I'm not saying that importers are bad. I have a lot of friends that run importing companies or work for importers, but I do think that it's a transactional. Nobody has time to really investigate all of the things that I think would result in actual farm level impact, right? And many roasters believe in the principles of the ethical trading initiative. I don't think that many are really incorporating them into their purchasing practices. And then when it comes down to it, like you can believe in long-term contracts, you could believe in living income reference prices, multi-season purchasing. But when you get a coffee that doesn't meet your quality spec, all of the litigation is like supports you to reject that coffee, right? You don't have to go to arbitration because people will be like, okay, yeah, I'll just send you another sample, or, we'll just find another home for this coffee. And how many times have you heard that, right? And so, yeah, it's like, of course, you're going to reject if the quality spec isn't up to your standard. And I think that's a terrible position to put producers in. So I think that the focus on quality, while it has opened a lot of doors and it's really fun, it's way too niche, and it really doesn't have the impact that I think roasters think that it does, right? So you have like large buyers of fair trade coffee, albeit it's like commodity coffee, 80 points or, it's anywhere from 70 to 80. Why wouldn't those farmers also be justified to earn a living income reference price? They do. Like it should be justified. And so, if you work on that as like your baseline, then quality coffee is just like astronomically expensive. And there are some markets that we know of, and they're very close to you, and you probably are in those markets as well, is just, coffee can get so expensive, but no one's going to buy it. No one's going to buy it at the volume that actually will make an impact, right? So if there's like a large roaster that's buying 800 containers at today, let's say $360 minimum for FTO, that's going to have way more, well, I wouldn't say way more. It's going to have a very, very different impact than 30 bags at $7 a pound.
Are there any other kind of downfalls that you'd look at with direct trade in comparison to something like fair trade?
The best parts of fair trade and the best parts of direct trade combine and form what has been called the magic sort of Venn diagram overlap, right? So fair trade, direct trade, magic when they work together. And a lot of that is just about these social safety nets, the way that you can leverage contracts to get pre-harvest finance, that there are tripartite agreements that help support producer organizations, that there are fair and equitable payment terms that help support producer organizations. But then you have long-term commitments. You have a focus on the value of the product itself and not on a C market intervention. Those things, when they combine, that's really what that ethical trade initiative, responsible purchasing practices principles are really all about, right? So those two things together, if the industry could just figure that out, that would be great. I could go home and I don't have to work anymore. But yeah.
I think it also comes down to what do we even mean when we say direct trade, because it's not a validated or certified term. Anyone can say it and mean essentially anything. Right? And I mean, there's the intent that kind of was behind it when it first emerged out of like Stumptown counterculture, intelligentsia, and kind of those movements, and has been embodied by some people. But I think in this space that the real risks are when a roaster or an importer is talking about this phrase direct trade. You've really got to kind of ask yourself, like, what is it that you're doing, and is it kind of, does it have considerations around the ethics? How do you kind of validate that? How do you check it? Because, there's a lot of people who say, oh yeah, I traveled once to Colombia and I met the farmer, I did a tour on their farm and I buy that coffee through my importer and I'm doing direct trade. And I mean, that is not the intent or the spirit of it. And also, when you say direct trade, it doesn't mean that you've done any checks on the ethical procurement or the sustainability of that pricing, or even the transparency of it. Like, what are you actually paying at the farm gate? Are you just paying an import price?
Yeah.
Are you paying FOB? Like, where's the money trace going?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And, what are actually you paying in import and margin for your importers, right? And it's like that level of pricing transparency doesn't exist. And that's what I love about the specialty coffee transaction guide, even though it is self-reported and unaudited. It definitely shows that, okay, well, roasters are interested in knowing, hey, I bought this for you, and you put in a carry cost, and there's a margin, and there's financing costs associated with it. What did you pay on the FOB level?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. Like, I might shop around for a better value because I don't need to charge my customers this price if I can work with someone who's not going to be like thrown in a bunch of financing fees, right? And that's fine, tis what tis. Like I said, who's got the time? But I will say that I think my one hot take is just this, right? Is about this concept of not necessarily direct trade, but it is this concept of people want to eliminate the middleman, that they want to get cost efficiencies, and that's right. And they want to have more of a direct relationship, and that's right. And this is all good. It all leads to, better consumer prices in the end and better prices for the roasters and, probably, hopefully economies of scale down the line. But I always find it funny when roasters do talk about like middlemen and direct relationships, because I'm like, do you know that you are a coffee roaster and you too are a middleman? Like, you are in the middle of producer and consumer, right? You are capturing value, you're creating value, but you're capturing that value that could otherwise be captured by someone closer to source and at considerably less cost if you think about all of that like compound interest and percentages added on top of it, right? And so I would just wonder, like, is there this quality and like trade-off for quality and ethics, right? Because like nobody really wants to import roasted coffee from somebody that's just going to sit in a warehouse and go stale. But arguably, if the coffee value capture in a supply chain could remain in country, wouldn't it be better off for the industry? Like, maybe. So, if a Swift cup, like, let's not even talk about just roasted coffee. Let's just talk about roasted coffee innovation. So it's not just whole beans sitting in a warehouse, but if like a Swift cup or a Cometeer can make quality instant coffee 7 steps down the supply chain, why can't somebody do that in Mexico? Or why can't somebody do that in Burundi? And capture that value and then export it, right? And there are structural inhibitors for that. There are tariffs. There are, like, the world has prevented producing countries, countries around the equator that basically had to take out debt from the World Bank and had to go through structural adjustment programs. They can't really do that because it's against the rules. And I think that is fucking terrible. And we're all buying into it. That's my hot take.
I like it. Just word up to that. There's a whole heap to like digest in there. But I think that's
I was trying to think about like roasting on, at origin to then freeze it, and then could we have frozen bags of roasted coffee being transported around the world somehow?
Well, I mean, the flip side is also that we've had a few great guests on the podcast who are from producing countries, also pioneering or at least really pushing the edge of like specialty roasted, in Colombia, in kind of
Carlos on
and it's just like that's where huge change is going to happen, because they're really like it's all built to like capture the value there, drink the coffee there, value it.
For sure.
Everyone wins. So
domestic consumption, like, great pathway, like domestic production to export. Like, what about that?
Yeah, I like it.
What about it?
What about it? Think about it, everyone. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends at Apex Lab.
If you listen to this podcast, you know Apex Lab mineral concentrates.
Yeah, these are the products that are used by world champions to unlock the full potential of their coffees.
But they've actually just released a new crazy product called Conflux. This is water that's been hit with ultra-low frequency electromagnetic waves.
It does sound crazy, but I actually saw some competitors use this technology at the World Barista Championships.
Look, I thought it sounded ridiculous, but till we did some tests here in the office, I could actually taste the difference. There was more body, there was more sweetness. And hey, if you're a critic or you're skeptical, I dare you to try it. See if there's a difference or not.
Yep. Visit apexlab.com and you be the judge. Colleen, let's get a little bit more operational for our listeners with this. Can you give us some top tips for how a coffee buyer could shift their focus to being a little bit more ethical on the procurement?
I definitely have different answers depending on the size of business, depending on the scale. But I do, I've been approached by some roasters that have said like, how do I get my direct trade program like verified? And I think Katie talked about this too, right? On the pod, like she said Counterculture had gone through a process of getting verification, but it's extremely expensive and it didn't offer the flexibility that they needed, right? And I would say that you don't necessarily need to have your program verified. Leverage other programs. Like there are definitely tried and true organizations that focus on that are what we call voluntary sustainability standards, VSSs, that already do this compliance mechanism that you don't have to do. That you could ask for some additional information potentially through other like partner organizations such as the Specialty Coffee Transaction Guide and say, put out that information of we have this verification scheme, we also do this, this is our model. And that just lends to, I guess, more credibility in general. And so I definitely think that larger organizations that are really out in the world talking about their relationships, it would be really awesome if they could also leverage the organizations that are already doing this and not reinventing the wheel. Because I just feel like there's so much of this mentality that specialty coffee is built like in a vacuum and we're gonna like reconstruct the coffee industry. Like without that real like admission, that self-reflection that we are fully beholden to the success of commodity coffee. We are built on historic trading routes. We're built on historic infrastructure. The C market is not going away as much as people would like it to go away. You could have your own purchasing practices that focus on direct, fixed costs, fixed pricing. But by ignoring sort of this larger looming elephant in the room, which is commodity coffee needs to change, but commodity coffee needs to survive in order for us to survive, that has to change. So embrace that. Embrace some of the better organizations that try and hold commodity coffee accountable and work from there. That's what I would really suggest that larger specialty roasters do. For smaller ones, it's really hard. It's like I said, you're wrapped up in an HR investigation. You are trying to figure out your insurance policies for the next year. You probably don't have to deal with that in Australia because you're not the United States. but yeah, there's a lot of costs and just time suck and mental energy suck that happen when you're running a business. But, or even just like as a barista, just dealing with customers day to day, like, come on, it's exhausting. Takes a mental toll. But, the issue is like, you don't have time, you're limited resource, you're not going to hop on a plane. Even if you did, what's the point? I just would say that really start to think through the values of your business and really start to think like, does quality equal humanity? And in what ways do those things maybe come into conflict with each other within your business practices, right? So rejecting lots, only focusing on high quality coffees, only communicating stories of farmers with high quality coffees, not really digging into the types of coffees that are being offered to you by importers or, what's baked into those costs. I would say that that's a core principle that people should start to understand is that there is absolute humanity in shit coffee, and we gotta embrace that, or else we're going nowhere fast, and we're going to continue to see like just destruction across the industry.
I think you've just hit down with some more hot takes in there, I reckon. Embrace the humanity of shit coffee.
I mean, it's a hard thing to do if it's just like, you can understand that the two sides to it. It's a big shift to kind of make.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing to communicate with your customers as well that you're selling to,
Yeah. But I think that we can be advocates in the specialty industry for maybe we just need to kind of broaden our vision. It doesn't mean that you have to own it and doesn't mean it has to be sitting in your coffee lineup even, but it's an acknowledgement that it's such a big kind of art. It's like it's the foundation of what we do and we need to kind of
sorry, I misunderstood. I thought we were saying like accept the shit coffee and sell that. Is that what we're saying?
Is that what you're saying?
Or
Yeah.
you could do whatever you want with that statement. That's my gift to you, and you figure out how to work it.
I think there's some good value in like definitely getting the coffee that's lower cost but still holding the same values to it, right, in your business. And we've seen this, with the cost of the market. Many roasters around the world have shifted their buying to buy lower grade, lower cost coffees to try and accommodate. But I guess just hold those values clear, hold the humanity of it clear, because it can still have huge impact on that front, even if in the cup it's not as exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've had a wide-ranging conversation. We've gone a deep dive schooling about trade dynamics and ethical purchasing. Hopefully it's helped with folks. Just looking ahead, Colleen, in the next, 5 to 10 years, what do you think are some of the top topics or areas that we as an industry should be focusing on?
I would say that bring it back to just like the reality of what the coffee value chain looks like, right? Like 25 million, by some estimates, smallholder producers disaggregated around the world. And 10% value capture of the final product value that ends up remaining in the country of which that coffee is produced. These things are related. There's not a lot of producer voice. There's not a lot of producer value in this sort of large scale setting. And I know that specialty is really good at highlighting or elevating producer stories. I would say that the market, the way that it's constructed, is designed to do exactly what it's doing, which is extracting value, anonymizing coffee, dehumanizing coffee, and like the systems are doing what they're designed to do. So if you want to change that, you got to look at the way that we're doing it. It's not just about paying a price. It's really about looking at all of the different dynamics that go to disrupting. I hate that word disrupting, but yes, disrupting the way that the coffee industry works right now. And it's not going to go away, but we at least need to understand it in order to call it out in a way that actually results in producers having more value, producers having more voice, and sustainable, resilient coffee actually rising to the top in terms of market demand, right? So the future of 10 years from now, the estimates are that coffee consumption will drastically outstrip coffee supply.
Yep.
That demand needs to be for resilient, climate adaptive coffee where producers are capturing more value, or else we're never going to see ourselves out of this problem. So how can you do that? Like, how can we change our mentality? How can we have this like mental structural shift in ourselves and in our businesses to say that, I guess I'm going to use I guess I coined a phrase, there's humanity in shit coffee, but also to, just to recognize that there's value in combining the benefits of the best parts of so many different types of systems, and that no one value chain, no one unique coffee, no one like roaster relationship is going to find our way out of this, right? And there's so much value that I find in working with producer cooperatives, in becoming a coffee cooperative. Like, that was my vision for Gimme. There's got to be more cooperation. There has got to be less focus on competition. And like, I had said this to somebody recently, like, what if there was like a barista competition, but it was cooperative? And it wasn't just focused on, here's like the unique that I did. It's like, no, how about we have a cooperative team competition, like where we're not focused on like the F1 car, but we're focused on mass transit, right? Like that is something to, I think, celebrate more than that the like very specialized technological advances of like, how can we extract more out of like this roast profile or this type of brewing technology.
Yep.
Fuck it. I don't want that.
Supply chain championships. I love it.
100%. Yeah.
And what I kind of hear out of what you just said there is like, we need to disrupt your existing system, or at the very least, re-look at your existing kind of procurement and system there. If you're just focused on price, or even just price and quality, is like, that's not enough to bolster like a future resilient supply of coffee. That's not going to cut it. So look to the other resources that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot to think about here. And as we look to, at Golden Brown kind of extend that coffee program, it's going to be great diving in with it with you, Ben, and kind of tapping into all these things that we've kind of discussed and how we can be a part of that kind of more ethical sourcing. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us and for your time. That was an absolute masterclass and deep dive into the topic. I just wanted
sun went down. No,
yeah.
It's the sundowner session.
If you time lapse this episode, we'll just have the sun slowly going down over that. I did also want to give you a moment just at the end for like a nice little bit. I feel like we've got the hot takes during the episode, right? Like, I think we're good on a hot take. So we can kind of maybe just spend this time to do a little shout out. If there's someone in the industry or that you work with that you think is doing an amazing job that maybe doesn't get the light shone on them enough, just wanted to give you the stage to do a little shout out.
I always go back to the same guy, Rick Pizer. I talked about him earlier. He's fully retired. I don't know if he's ever going to watch this, listen to this.
He will
Maybe
definitely.
Somebody does. Yeah, please send it to him. And I have told him a few times, like, you changed my life. And that is just like immeasurable. So do the right thing and you will also change somebody's life. And hopefully he'll change a lot of people's lives. That's all I got to say.
That's
shout
beautiful.
out to Rick. For anyone who was interested in that documentary, is that available that people can listen to it, or what the name of the was?
It's got to be on YouTube, on the YouTubes. It's called After the Thin Months, I believe.
Yeah. Great.
No, After the Harvest, the Thin Months, or
Okay, great. Go and search that if you're interested, and maybe it'll change some other lives out there as well.
You know, what you could do is that you could host a viewing party and have a conversation afterwards. I always wanted to do that.
Maybe it sounds like another little collaborative effort here between It's Just Coffee and Fairtrade International / Colleen Anunu. We're going to have a viewing party, Ithaca, New York. Happening.
Come to Ithaca, New York.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm in.
Well, thanks
Swim
so much.
in a waterfall. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That sounds good to me. Thanks so much, Colleen, for the time and for sharing all of your knowledge. It's been great. And if anyone else is listening and wants to hear about some other topics or has questions for us to follow up, feel free to drop us a DM on socials, which is It's Just Coffee Pod. Cast.
And then the email is hello@itsjustcoffeepod.com. So you can hit us on both of those. And make sure, if you're someone working in the industry and you found this, conversation insightful, make sure to share it with someone that may not have heard it, because I think there's so much that we can take from this conversation and it should kind of be shared amongst us. Thank you so much for joining us. And Ben, you had that really poignant statement about ethical and sustainable sourcing, but you said it in a really sultry way to me before the podcast, and I just wanted you to share it here with us now.
Is that what I did?
Yeah.
Now I'm just trying to think back about this imaginary statement that I made. There's nothing hotter than a hot coffee that's ethically sourced.
Oh, naughty,
I don't know
Ben.
what I said there.
All right, we'll see you next week, guys.
Spicy. See ya.